In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he said it's all good, including the first man and the first woman, Adam and Eve. But they didn't stay good. They decided to remove God from the equation, eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and as our federal head, plunge all of us into sin and ultimately into death. But God, who has been on an eternal mission to reconcile all things to himself, so that one day we can all gather around the throne of the line of the tribe of Judah, God promised that the offspring of the woman would come and crush the serpent's head. We've been looking for that offspring, and it came all the way down to a boy named David. That's where our story picks up. Ruth, a Moabite, marries Boaz, who's from Bethlehem of Judah. They have a son named Obed. Obed has a son named Jesse, and Jesse has 8 sons, one of whom is named David. He's really important. But as we turn the page, our story actually has nothing to do with him right away. We turn to the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. What are they about? Well, very simply, there's a woman, her name is Hannah. Hannah has no children. She wants children, so she asks God, give me a son and I will give him back to you. That's exactly what happens. God lets Hannah have a son. His name is Samuel. She gives Samuel back to God, who becomes a prophet. During this time, as he is a prophet, Israel starts to demand, God, give us an earthly king. See, they were supposed to have a heavenly king. They were supposed to live under God and his rule, but they want an earthly king to be like the countries around them. So God allows them to have an earthly king. And Samuel anoints the first king of Israel, a great guy named Saul from the family of Benjamin. Wait a minute. We've read the rest of the story. We're looking for the line of the tribe of Judah, not the line of the tribe of Benjamin. So what's with this Saul guy? Well, Israel wanted a king, and they get Saul. They have a kind of a favorite enemy, it seems, the Philistines. They're always fighting the Philistines. And there's one story in the Samuels that's interesting here because they take the Ark of the Covenant, the very sign of the presence of God. They take that as a good luck charm with them into battle against the Philistines. Their hearts have no recollection of God. They're not following him, but they take this Ark as a good luck charm. Well, that's not how God works. Israel loses. They lose the Ark. And God shows, you can't remove me from the equation and do things your own way. It doesn't work. Eventually they get the ark back, but it's a sign. Israel gets their earthly king. Saul starts out good, but then eventually he starts to let pride seep in and he starts to do things his own way. And eventually the kingdom is removed from him and his family. He's still on the throne, but the dynasty is going to end. And God sends Samuel to the town of Bethlehem to anoint a new king from the family of Jesse. And he anoints his son David as the next king. And then in 2 Samuel 7, God gives what we call the Davidic covenant, a covenant between him and David. And he says, your line will never end. That's good. That sounds serpent crusher. And one of your sons will rule forever. Okay, it's early. But as far as promises and serpent crushers, a son who rules forever, a forever king, that sounds promising. So we need to follow this guy. David needs to stay alive. So if he were to, pick a fight with a professional murderer and a professional soldier named Goliath, that would be bad. Because contrary to a lot of sermons, David and Goliath isn't actually about you facing the giant of your math test or something like that. No. David and Goliath is about God's promised child, the promised line of David facing Goliath. And if Goliath kills him, you and I are going to hell. But David's not writing the story. Goliath isn't writing the story. God is. And David beats Goliath. One of the promised rewards for any soldier who would beat Goliath was to marry Saul's daughter. So David marries Saul's daughter, and he is now potentially in line for the throne. Well, God loves David, but Saul does not. And there's a time when David is at a family dinner with his father-in-law, and Saul picks up a spear and chucks it at David's face. Again, I don't care who you are, having a spear thrown at your face is unfortunate. It's a problem, especially when it's from your in-laws. That shows that there are probably some family tensions. But especially when we need you and your family to stay alive and someone's chucking spears at your face, this is bad. So David actually spends the next several years running from Saul. Eventually, Saul dies, the dynasty ends, and David, the anointed king, becomes king. He is a good king. Remember back in Judges where it says there was no king in Israel and the people were doing that which is right in their own eyes? Well, David is a king who's doing what's right in God's eyes, and he brings all the people with him. He's actually called by God himself. He's called a man after God's own heart. Problem is, he's still a man. And men and women have this problem of always wanting to remove God from the equation. David does that. We read a story about how at a time when he's acting like an exception, it says that there was a time of the year when the kings were supposed to go to war with the army. It's that time of year, and David stays back in the palace. Can't sleep one night. He's walking around on the roof of his house and sees a woman taking a bath. Her name is Bathsheba. He likes what he sees. He sleeps with her, commits adultery, and then has her husband murdered to cover it all up. And because of this, God says to David, the one whose line is never going to end, he says, because of your sin, violence and immorality will never leave your house, but one of your family will stay alive. Well, violence and immorality, that's just the perfect summary of David's family and then the rest of Israel's history. I mean, it starts off with a brother raping his half-sister, and then a group of brothers gang murdering this one, and then Absalom, one of David's own sons, leads a revolt and pushes David out of the kingdom, and David has to run from his own son. In the end, Absalom is murdered in a violent way. I mean, it's just a mess. It looks good for a little while. Solomon takes the throne, looks pretty good, but ultimately, violence and immorality follows the family, and the kingdom actually splits. The 10 northern tribes become a kingdom called Israel. The 2 southern tribes become a kingdom called Judah. All because one man's sin. Was there grace? Was there forgiveness? Sure, there always is with God, but sin still has consequences. And what this shows us is even the best of men, men who are called men after God's own heart, they fall short of salvation. My biggest problem, your biggest problem, David's biggest problem is sin and death. We need the serpent crusher. Thankfully, the promise is still alive, and we still have hope.